Who got the truth? Is it you? Is it you? Is it you? Who got the truth now? Is it you? Is it you? Is it you? Sit me down, say it straight. Another story on the way. Who got the truth?
Welcome to episode 18 of Acquired, the podcast where we talk about technology acquisitions. I'm Ben Gilbert.
I'm David Rosenthal.
And we are your hosts. Today, we have a very special episode that kind of breaks the mold of the show. We had an opportunity that we absolutely couldn't pass up. And even though we're not covering a single specific deal, we think this is going to be a super, super interesting episode for listeners out there. So, David, you want to tell them about our guests?
Yeah, we are lucky to be joined by a special guest today, Taylor Barada, who is the VP and head of Corp Dev, Corp Strategy, and Strategic Partnerships at Adobe. So welcome, Taylor. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, excited to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
Of course, quick background on Taylor. He joined Adobe in 2013. Before that, he was the VP of Business at Zynga. And before that, he was also relevant to our show, head of Corp Dev at Yahoo. He has a JD MBA from Northwestern. And after Northwestern, spent a couple years at Bain before getting into the deal-making world. And perhaps most interestingly, you are the first guest on our show who is a former professional athlete. Taylor played professional soccer, or probably more accurately, football in England. So maybe we'll get into that. Lots of deal making in that world.
Yeah, exactly. No, I would say that looking back on, I didn't have the language at the time, but there was no real U.S. scene when I came out of college, and so effectively I became an independent solo soccer entrepreneur. Had to go kind of figure out how to insert myself into the European game, and it was an amazing life experience, but not always the easiest.
Yeah, man, that could be like a whole separate episode. Probably not of this podcast, but I'm sure it's a cool story.
So what we thought we'd do for this episode is kind of stick to our typical structure, but instead, as Ben mentioned, of talking about one acquisition in particular, we just thought we'd use it as a vehicle to, Taylor, get your insights kind of from the inside of being in Corp Dev and how you think about deals and acquisitions as you're going through them. So we have a bunch of questions, but thought we'd start with sort of the acquisition history and facts section as usual. And I think the best way to kick off would be something, that probably most of our listeners are curious about, and I'm curious about. How do conversations typically start between Corp Dev and startups? Either when you're approaching startups or when they're approaching you. What's the beginning of the story usually look like?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think you guys even doing this podcast and this focus is, I think, filling a nice gap and need, because it's not something I spend a ton of time thinking about, because at some point it's just sort of natural and it seems very fluid and relationship driven and not some big moment of, hey, we're for sale. Although, those things do happen, but
yeah, and I think
it can be very sort of mystical and seem like this dark black art that, and I find sometimes that entrepreneurs, when it feels that way, they tend to pull back and be very reserved because they're not sure what they can and can't say, and they don't want to say the wrong thing, and all of which is totally fair. And so on our end, what I've always done individually when I've been a deal lead, and then what the culture I try to create on our group, is that you remember that the process is fluid, and it's hard to know which ones are going to actually go the distance and lead to a deal and which ones aren't. The Valley, as we all talk about, and sort of the broader technology industry outside of the Valley, is incredibly small. And so because of that, it's very relationship oriented. And because of that, the way these conversations often start is just literally a connection and intro, like, hey, you guys are in this space. This company's doing interesting things. You guys should just get to know each other. I've always liked, after stumbling across it at some point in the last couple of years, Mark Suster's blog post on investing in lines, not dots. And I think his concept is that it's very hard to make a decision when you only have one point in time. But when you've had connections over time and you have the benefit of sort of seeing people say what they're going to go do and then hopefully go do it or something better, it develops credibility, and you have time to sort of process and have a perspective so that on how it fits in. And so oftentimes it's as simple as that. We get introduced, we sort of say, hey, you should talk to someone. There absolutely is the other sort of 20% case where some company's been going off in a space that we haven't been tracking, or a company that we haven't necessarily focused on, that decide they either get the stereotypical inbound strategic interest from someone else in the space, and they decide that they want to talk to others and see if they want to sell, or they want to sell to us, or frankly sell to the highest bidder, that type of thing. And we'll get those calls, we'll take those calls, and we will sometimes do those. But that's a high bar, and we try hard to develop relationships so that sort of 80% of it is more strategy driven, more relationship driven, and there's broader perspective and a broader context that's developed over a long period of time.
Yeah, and in that original kind of introduction, when someone says, "Hey, this company is a newer company, they're playing around in sort of a similar space or similar customer segment to you guys," what's the context for starting that relationship? Is it a partnership, or is it just like, let's not play any games, we sort of know that there might be some acquisition at some point in the future, or what's the incentive for that entrepreneur to kind of start that conversation?
Yeah, look, you can waste an enormous amount of time if you just run around the valley talking to all the big companies, right? That's not your job. Your job's to build value for customers, and at some point you're going to be able to monetize that value either through an IPO or the sale of the company. And with that as context, I think sometimes you get into a scenario of like, well, and I've had introductions where a VC was an investor in a company, tried to make an introduction for us, and the entrepreneur told the VC who was on his board, like, why would I even take that meeting? I'm not trying to sell the company, you know that. And I've always found that kind of humorous, because the whole point is, it's like the old saying of, when you want money, ask for advice. When you want, advice, ask for money, and that whole thing. It's like, if you're like calling us asking to be sold, it certainly can happen. But, if your first interaction is that, it puts an awful lot of weight on that interaction, and doesn't need to be that way. And I think it also ignores the point, which I always make, and when we sort of talk about it over time as things develop, is that if you're smart as a seller, you're going to have a fiduciary duty to get the highest value you can for the business when it comes to that time. So that just is. But at some point, once the deal takes place, you and the team will be working there. And so is it a place where you think your vision can not just sort of go and get parked, but hopefully can be accelerated, and it's not an end as much as it is a beginning? And are they the type of people that you want to work with? Do they see the world the same way? And those things, sometimes you think like, oh, that doesn't matter, we're just going to sell to the highest bidder. And it's like, well, yes, of course we get that. Everyone gets that. But it doesn't mean that you should ignore all other stakeholders, all other factors. And the way you sort of suss those out, and frankly do diligence on us and other places, and try to see whether it feels right, is by getting to know people over time. So I actually think it's best when it's explicitly not around a specific conversation. It's certainly fine if there is a specific partnership that seems very interesting with a big company, but those also can be colossal wastes of time. Every small company thinks that every big company is the keys to the kingdom, and a partnership with them will unlock everything. But oftentimes they take a very long time to get done. Once they're done, they take a very long time to mature. And the ones that are truly game-changing for startups are few and far between. And so it doesn't mean you shouldn't do them. It just means you have to be pragmatic about what you should expect from them. And so if there is a partnership you want, we oftentimes act as sort of a concierge into this wildly complex 15,000 person company, which we sort of know how to navigate. And from the outside, it's probably extremely hard to figure out who to get to if you want to talk about a partnership around one particular product line. So we can definitely do that. But like I said, I think it's best oftentimes if it's much more open-ended, and it's just, hey, we're in this space, would love to meet, this VC that we both know, thought we should get to know each other, and not looking for funding, not looking to sell, but would love to grab coffee and just talk about what we're doing.
It's amazing, as we're talking about this, and even as we were preparing for the episode, like how much this mirrors the process of raising venture capital too. Yeah. Which, to be honest, I mean, it's an education for me. I never really thought about that, but we coach our companies when they're thinking about raising around, all the time. You're always raising. You're not always closing, but you're always raising because of this very, it takes time to build relationships. And VC investors, as you point out, the Schuster blog post is great about needing to invest in lines, not dots. And occasionally there'll be a dot that, is so compelling you have to invest in, or it would seem for you guys, you have to buy. But it takes time to build these relationships. What do you think, as you're doing that, maybe talk a little bit about kind of the importance of culture and that relationship and the people fit. I know it's something that's really important to you and Adobe. How are you assessing that when you're talking to entrepreneurs?
I'd say Adobe, it's uniquely important to us, and we've walked away from, extremely large deals, north of $1 billion because we didn't feel like the culture fit was there. And part of it just has to do with how we think about what we're doing and what we think has made us an enduring business over 30 years in a really dynamic space. And, the company has morphed from, PostScript and printing tools and things like that, into desktop publishing and then creative tools and now into marketing. And now
Photoshop itself was an acquisition a long time ago.
Yes. Yeah. Again, that's somewhat unique. And then it was, my understanding was it was a couple guys and a product, but yes, the nascent piece was there and then they built around it.
All right, listeners. Now is a great time to talk about a new partner of ours here on Acquired, Legora, the agentic operating system that is redefining how the world's best legal teams work.
Yep, it's sort of obvious that AI is going to completely change the legal industry. I bet most of you listening have dropped a contract into some sort of AI chatbot out there. Legora took that insight and asked the question, what if you really built something with that power from the ground up for the legal industry?
So the founders did exactly what great founders do, operate with obsessive customer focus. They embedded inside a massive law firm for months. They sat with the lawyers just watching how the work really gets done.
And that's how you get features that customers love, like Tabular Review, where you drop in a folder of hundreds of contracts and it pulls every key term into a grid a lawyer can actually work with. Legora's bet here is interesting. Since it lets each lawyer handle more complexity, any given person can increase the quality of their work and do higher value work. And this means that the pie can grow even as each individual task takes less time.
And they recently launched Legora Agent, offering greater intelligence and performance. The agent lets lawyers set an objective. Then it can handle the planning and the execution and delivery of the final product. Legal teams get to maintain full control and transparency since they're still involved where judgment is required.
And Legora works where you already work. You can use it within Microsoft Word while redlining or drafting. The early Legora numbers essentially speak for themselves. When they have a head-to-head pilot with their top competitor, they win 70% of the time. Legora now has over 100,000 lawyers on the platform from 1,200 legal teams in 50 countries. And crazily, they went from 1 million to 100 million in ARR in about 18 months.
Truly insane numbers. And that is the real test. Plenty of things demo well, but the question is whether a busy associate actually reaches for it during crunch time, or whether a partner trusts it before going into a conversation with a major client. If your legal team wants to check it out, whether you're a law firm or you're in-house at a company, you can learn more at legora.com/acquired and just tell them that Ben and David sent you. You talk about the qualities that you look for when you're acquiring someone to be a culture fit. How does that impact the outcome of the acquisition? And is there like anything in specifically that you sort of look for as, okay, this is going to be, this is going to make this outcome financially successful for Adobe because this person has X mindset? Yeah,
I think it's definitely related. I mean, I always say, we don't care about winning the press release. You create value. And one of the reasons why valuing companies is art, not science, in a strategic acquirer scenario, versus a private equity or whatnot, is that, like, look, and even in private equity, this is really true if you get down to it, is that, your valuation become because of a present value of your future cash flows. Like, what drives those future cash flows is what you actually go do in the market together.
Yep.
And inevitably, we're not like a holding company that's just going to buy great properties and let them roll. We're trying to have a point of view around the market and say, hey, look, we can come together, and maybe it's not 1 and 1 equals 3, but there's some sort of element of that overused word of synergy. And we're looking for leverage and looking for a perspective that we can accelerate the vision of the entrepreneur, but also, frankly, accelerate our own vision and hopefully even broaden it at times, just as we did when we went from creative to marketing with the Omniture acquisition. Excuse me.
Right.
And it's the reason it's so important is that if you have an incredible strategy, an incredible vision, we all know it's meaningless. It's about execution. Like, big companies are no different than startups in that effect. Execution creates value. Strategy is what allows you to have the opportunity to get into that mode, but you got to go do it. And I think the one last thing, and we've touched on this a little bit when we were catching up before the call, is that to me, if I had to pick one hallmark that gives me a sort of good, positive early indicator that we're on the right track, is when I start to see through the back and forth and comparing notes on the strategy and the vision, that this concept of accelerating the entrepreneur's vision around where they're going is there, but that's not the only thing. The other thing is they actually start to embrace the broader vision that we have, and say, you know what, I actually think I can expand your vision, and I want to get in. And if I could work with you guys on that, I could do something bigger. And so, oftentimes you'll see over time that the deals that work really well, and where it particularly works well for the founders or CEOs, is where they end up loving the concept of getting inside a bigger company, and maybe they're really dyed-in-the-wool product people, and all this raising money and all this other stuff is part of what they have to do, but it's not what they love. And all of a sudden they're unleashed and they get to just go do what they want and spend all of their energy there. And so whether it's here or, two of the smaller deals I did while I was at Yahoo, one was for a company called Citizen Sports, founder named Mike Kearns. I founded that company with another guy named Jeff Ma, who's well known from the Bringing Down the House days, and all that from MIT. But so Mike came in and just did phenomenally well. And then another was a company called Into Now that was founded and spun out by a guy named Adam Kahan. And those two guys stuck around Yahoo for, Mike just left about a year ago, and I think Adam's still at Yahoo, and they rose to be two of Marissa's SVPs of product. And these were smaller acquisitions, so it's not like they came in the door doing that. But they had a real passion for sort of online media and where it could go, and sort of not just what they were doing with their product, but what you could do if you applied some of the principles of social and mobile to the broader Yahoo business. And we've seen the same thing here at Adobe, and I think it's a classic sign that that things will work out quite well.
It's really cool to hear you talk about that. We had, in one of our early episodes, we had Kurt Delbenny from Microsoft on, and we talked about the Acompli acquisition. And he talked about this very fact that, one of the things that Microsoft is thinking about now in terms of M&A is just what you're talking about the people and the culture fit. Since Kurt's now leading the LinkedIn acquisition, but which is much bigger and more complex. But for Javier at Soltero at Acompli, he's now running all of Outlook, and exactly mirrored these themes. Let's move on. We sort of break acquisition history and facts into two parts, and my favorite part is sort of the stories of the acquisition, sort of is what we've been talking about here. But I bet a lot of our listeners will be really curious about, like, what's the process? Once you've realized that, there's a relationship here that could bear fruit, what are the steps in the process when you're actually working through a deal at that point, from LOI to term sheet to the definitive agreements? What are the key milestones for you guys?
And what specifically are you looking for? Is it cool, financial, check, cool, there's no lawsuits against them, check, cool, your product is growing with users, check, those sorts of things?
Yeah. Look, you have to, ultimately, you're going to do a deal, if it makes, strategic sense, the technology product fit is there, and the financials you think make sense for your shareholders, right? And for us, the fourth one that I would put that over, sort of cuts across all of that is just the people that, as we've already talked about. So the hard part about the deal is these are all, even though we have a quote unquote process in every large acquirer that is sort of a repeat player, right? And so all the places that I've been and done this role are definitely in that. And, the other ones are people like you mentioned, so Microsoft, Oracle, Facebook, et cetera. Repeat players absolutely have a process, and there's different flavors, and each company has different places where different types of decisions either take place or which parts of the org are responsible for them. So there's definitely a number of different ways to do it. But it's, every deal is its own, sort of perfect snowflake. They're all snowflakes. And so they're deals, and there's unbelievable, correlations from them. And when you get into the granular, everyone has decided we're going to make this happen, it becomes kind of a machine, and the legal side and the diligence side starts to take on a life of its own, and that really does happen. So I would say in general, this is tough because on the outside, particularly if you're not going through a hardcore sort of auction process and have hired a bank or whatever, but it's a place where you sort of think, well, look, we're not really for sale, but they seem to be interested, so I'm open to doing this, but I don't want to sort of waste all my bandwidth and emotional energy and sort of exploring this. How would we do it? So typically, there's usually an early meeting, with someone in the business unit that's responsible for the product area where there is the strategic interest in the overlap, and trying to get an understanding for the product vision, the product technology, maybe a bit of a demo, a little early point of view on numbers. And I think sometimes it can be tough to decide, when do you share what? And I think, we're always fine if an entrepreneur feels like they want to get an NDA in place before they share some financials and things like that. We tend to try to make sure that we kind of have checkpoints. Like, if we get someone who's trying to sort of take a read on the market because they're about to do a fundraising round and they just figure they better think about it and they want to talk to a handful of people that are sort of the logical fits for that business, and say they decide we're one of them, and then sort of check in with us. We will oftentimes do at least one call without an NDA where we just sort of say, tell us the story, and we'll go through that. So there's sort of a high level business product check early on. And then at some point you start to kind of have a feel for the financial side as well as you go through that. The biggest milestone you'll find with large acquirers is kind of the LOI or the term sheet. And that almost always, and I truly mean almost always, includes a no-shop provision, of some period of time, typically sort of 45 to 60 days, sometimes 30 days. Those are the types of things where once you get to that stage, you'll have a lawyer involved and they can advise you what is quote unquote market.
Just like a venture financing. It's funny how
exactly.
they parallel.
You're going to have your lawyer, and they're going to be able to tell you what's market. They'll educate you on what the business ramifications are of what is being done. Every big company has slightly nuanced ways of doing things. And because we are repeat players and the lawyers are repeat players, there's certain things where, it's basically like, we're not going to do that because of the precedent of it and that type of thing. So oftentimes those are, but they, depending on, where the leverage lies, depends on how much those things get negotiated by the buyer or the seller. Again, exactly like a venture round in that respect. And then once you get through that, that's when you see the circle of knowledge on both sides expand, but particularly on the buy side. Sometimes it can be overwhelming because then we're going to, jump in and do a day minimum, oftentimes 2 or 3 days of kind of a deep dive, take us through the business, beginning to end, in terms of go through the product, go through the go-to-market, go through the financials, go through the operations, go through the technology architecture, et cetera. And then, that's when you build out a very detailed data room. And, I think with the super early stage companies, sometimes you'll run into some issues where they didn't have their house in order. They didn't get good legal advice early enough on. And, maybe they were working with a couple of outside agencies and they didn't have them sign an invention assignment agreement, that type of stuff. Those are, at this point, I saw that more 10 years ago than I do today. I think the breadth of, startup legal advice and sort of, smart, experienced angels as well, certainly the venture community, people tend to have a pretty buttoned up shop, particularly if they're venture backed, and things are pretty clean. But if you're outside of the valley and maybe the company was lucky enough to grow, bootstrapped or whatever, and they kind of just made it all work, every now and then you'll run across things where they didn't have their house in order, and then it's rarely a deal killer, but it usually ends up being something you got to sort of work around. So you drive through that. At some point, you put in place a definitive agreement where our lawyers will put together an acquisition agreement, depending on if it's a share purchase or an asset purchase, et cetera. And you kind of go back and forth on that, and try to get it finalized. And ultimately, deals are announced once the definitive agreement has been signed. And then there's a question of, is it a simultaneous sign and announce and close, meaning we signed it, we sent the money, we own it, or is there a split sign and close where we sign it, we announce it, and then there's 30 days to meet XYZ closing conditions before we would actually close. You'll see both.
Yeah, and you mentioned throughout all these steps, there was one point in there where the business owner talks with the company they're acquiring and compares vision and strategy and digs in with Corp Dev. How involved is the business owner throughout that entire process? Are they in every single meeting? Are they in that first meeting? Is it the business owner that first contacts that company? Like, what is their role, and what is the role of Corp Dev throughout the entire acquisition process?
Yeah, it's critical. So, one thing to know is you can't ignore Corp Dev. In many ways, they're going to be your guide and your partner throughout this. And I truly view it as a much more collaborative thing. If you're going to get a deal done eventually, it's going to be because everyone thinks it makes sense, and you're able to, get together at a valuation that everyone feels good about, right? So, I very much try to make it clear to people, and make sure that our deal leads make it clear that no one can, quote unquote, make you do anything you don't want to do. So that is one thing I think out of the gates to kind of demystify the whole process and take a little pressure off. The relationship with the business owner is critically important. In the language I use, and again, every company has sort of slightly different ways of thinking about this, but I think of it as there's an executive sponsor and there's a business owner. Oftentimes you will see, particularly if a company's kind of got some VC intros and things like that, they will be really focused on like trying to get in to meet the CEO or get to meet the the head of the whole business unit. And
I've never been guilty of that.
Yeah, and it's fine. And everyone gets it. It's the old thing of come in high and work down and blah blah. And it's on sometimes it can be fine. Other times it can be either off-putting or even sort of counterproductive in that if you get in front of them too early before the business owner and Corp Dev have been able to kind of frame it and suss out in combination with you sort of your business well enough that then we can effectively translate and help people understand why this is exciting, why this matters. They might take one meeting and be like, I wasn't that interested. And then it creates this uphill battle where Corp Dev and the business owner are like, no. We got to spend a little more time on this. Yeah. This one's interesting, right? And so
I've
trusting
seen this play out. It's so true.
So even if you've got like this perfect, hey, my venture guy says he is like golfing buddies and best friends with the CEO or whatever, right? It's just a card I generally just sort of say, play it straight up. Play it open, and then treat the Corp Dev person and the business owner as people that are your partners to figure out whether this makes sense. Not someone who you got to kind of like micromanage the thing, because ultimately it's not like a enterprise software sort of SaaS. You're going into an IT group. They've got a need for a widget. You've got a widget. You're going to sell them on why yours is the best, and then wham, we're done. Like, get it done, right? It's a very subtle collaborative dance where both sides are evaluating each other and getting to know each other. And you can't. It's sort of overblown to say it's a marriage, but look, you're selling your baby that you put heart and soul into creating. You want to find out if we're good stewards of it, if our visions align, and you should care about
It's
those
so
things.
funny going back to the parallels with venture. I mean, it just keeps coming up, but like we see companies make this mistake with us all the time is, they come in, they meet with one partner and, that relationship is progressing at a natural pace. And then, in the worst case, the founder CEO but oftentimes one of the other venture backers or somebody will come in and talk to another partner. And we call it partner shopping, and like nothing will kill a deal faster than that.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's less issue with that here because we're not a partnership. There's a natural organizational structure to a big company.
But you're still going to somebody you think has influence, but actually has no context on the relationship. And back to that being the most important thing, can totally see how that can blow up deals. Yeah, exactly. It rarely blows up deals. And that's the other thing why I say like there's almost no misstep that you can't get over if actually it makes business sense.
Right.
And that's the other reason why I say getting people in the mind space of like, you're building a great business, like you're going to get the exit you deserve. And we're looking for a collaboration to figure out whether we're the right home for it, right? It's like, it takes all the pressure off because the real answer is you don't need to micromanage and overmanage it. Like we do this all the time. And if we're approaching it with that mindset, like we're going to together to figure it out, right? Because the biggest reason people do that is because they're in like value optimization mode. In the back of their mind, they think, I got to maximize value. And it's like, yeah, totally. It is literally in the bylaws, it's your fiduciary responsibility, right? And we get it, and so it's part of that. But if you overmanage that and overplay it at the wrong times, it comes across awkward. And again, if it actually makes sense, you're probably going to recover from it. So even if you do, it's not that big a deal. Like I said, I've never not done a deal, but I've had deals where it was much harder to get there because, someone figured out some way to get in front of either the CEO or some other head of a business unit or something earlier than we probably would have ideally wanted. Or sometimes it comes in that way, and that's fine too. But then it's like, people got to do your job. To bring that whole thread back around to the core question, that you asked, I think it was Ben, the business owner or that sort of head of product is actually an extremely important relationship as well. Like you should have a sense of where, if you were king for a day and ran that business, where would you think that, the startup that you run fits in? And then how do you figure out who's responsible for that part of the business? And that's absolutely just as important a relationship. I would never say, only focus on that relationship and ignore Corp Dev, but I would also never say focus on Corp Dev and don't worry about that relationship. You kind of have to have both. And sometimes, again, it's this probably also is like the venture. It's very organic, and wherever you have an in a warm intro, take the warm intro and then ask the questions of, hey, should I talk to someone in Corp Dev or whatever? I have business unit partners who are very sophisticated, have sponsored deals many times, and part of the job of running a good, being a good product manager, let alone a kind of business unit, product owner or GM, is understanding the outside market and knowing the ecosystem that you're in. So they should be out there meeting startups and stuff. So oftentimes they will meet someone and they'll hand it off and say, you know what, I've met with this guy once or twice for coffee. I kind of like where he's headed. You should, nothing to do here. I'm not looking to do it. He's not looking to sell, but I just kind of want to get him on Corp Dev's radar. Can you meet with them? That type of thing. Other times we've partnered with the business unit to develop a strategy and overall, and we kind of know the spaces that we're sort of particularly interested in. We'll find a relationship or a company, and we'll get intros and we'll pass them through. I think that is one difference between the VC and the M&A world, is that sourcing is not some big magical thing. We every now and then we'll find something that we didn't expect because we've made an extra effort to get out and beat the bushes, but we're out there in the market. There's only so many acquirers. People will find us 9 out of 10 times.
If you're lucky as a VC firm, you also are in that position. Most of us aren't that lucky, but
All right, listeners, now is a great time to tell you about a longtime friend of the show, Vanta. AI has scrambled the whole security picture. It used to be that you proved that you were secure once a year, an audit or a static PDF, then everyone would nod and you're done. But in an AI-first world, that doesn't hold up anymore.
Yep, your risk surface changes every week now. A vendor turns on an AI feature or someone writes in a new model without telling IT, and your posture is different than it was last week, let alone at your last audit. Vanta's own research found that around 70% of companies have this quote unquote shadow AI running with no security review at all.
Right. And that's where Vanta comes in. They're the leading agentic trust platform, meaning they've built the thing that closes the gap. And the way that they close that gap is Vanta Agent. Think of it as a GRC engineer, that's governance, risk, and compliance, except that it's software and it doesn't sleep. It finds the issues, drafts the fixes, and cuts the time that you'd spend on vendor assessments in half.
In half! Which is exactly why more than 16,000 companies today run on Vanta. Companies like Ramp, Cursor, and Snowflake all stay audit ready and catch the risks that crop up between audits across every vendor, every AI tool, the whole environment.
And that's the real value. Trust has to be continuous now, which is why Vanta automates your security, your compliance, and the work to earn and prove trust. We're huge fans of Vanta over here, and literally hundreds of acquired listeners have become Vanta customers at their companies over the years. So you can get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/acquired. That's VANTA.com/acquired for $1,000 off, and just tell them that Ben and David sent you.
The next category that we talk about on the show is acquisition category. And so every deal that we look at, we say, was this a product acquisition or a business line acquisition or a people acquisition? We're curious on your end, like, do you guys do the same thing or is it more organic, like as you're looking at different companies and then they tend to fall like, are you guys thinking like, yep, this is definitely an acqui-hire, or like, oh, this could be like a huge business line acquisition, or, how's that going through your heads?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's industry store standard lingo, acqui-hires, tech and talent deals, whatever sort of business acquisitions or product acquisitions. Those types of things are definitely I've heard those used. We've used those all the time. We don't get too hung up on it. One construct I've used inside of our business is, from my Bain days, I had a respect for some of the profit from the core analysis, and they'd done, there was actually a book written a number of years ago called Profit from the Core, and they'd done analysis of like 2,000 companies and growth initiatives, both M&A and otherwise. And the concept was that once you understand what your core business is as a large scale company, understanding the business that drives the most profits and is sort of the most enduring, from a perspective of who is the customer, what's the channel to market, what's the geography you're playing in, what's the business model, and what's the product. Anytime you change one of those 5 things, you're like a one-step adjacency further from the core, and it creates risk. And actually, they showed through analysis of all these different companies that once you got, I think it was one step adjacency was maybe about a 30 to 40% chance of success. But once you got out, like 3 or 4 of those things changed, you dropped off to like 10% chance of success. It doesn't mean that you don't take, things that are multi-step adjacencies, because sometimes those are where the biggest opportunities are, but you have to make sure that they're worth the risk. Otherwise, you're just leading to sort of undisciplined diversification, and you have no better chances of success than just a private equity investor or a holding company, and probably less because it's not really how your business has been set up to focus the resources of the company on, right? So something like Omniture, we've gone back and looked at that in hindsight, and that was probably a 4-step adjacency in many ways. It was SaaS, completely new product. It was an enterprise selling motion, which we didn't have in mature fashion at that point. And the business model in terms of recurring revenue was new, because we hadn't moved to that with the creative side of the business. It was after that we moved from Creative Suite to Creative Cloud. So that was in hindsight a very risky big bet.
Yeah.
But it was a large big business that was the market leader, had real momentum, and so you could make that bet. And then if you focused on the rest of the things that you could control, it's ended up being a $2 billion plus. It's on the road to being more than that. Business for us. And so it's not that you don't do those things, but you do them for the right reasons. And so as you think about that, things that are in your core, like meaning we're already in that part of the business, that's where we're more likely to look for, some tech and talent, smaller kind of deals, or we look for like a little bit of a core expansion where it's kind of like a one step, adjacency where maybe we get a new product with a bit of a business around it's been proven in the market, but it can't, it's not scaled yet. We bring that in and we scale it. The Marketing Cloud in many ways, after the Omniture acquisition, there were a number of other add-on acquisitions that were done to broaden out the product portfolio and then sell through the same channel. In the enterprise space in particular, you've seen that, year after year. Once it's extraordinarily and perhaps not even appreciated how unbelievably hard it is to build a, true, large scale enterprise sales force. And the companies that have done that, that's such an unbelievably huge investment over, like probably a decade to get there, that then it's a question of, how do you maximize the throughput of that channel every year? And so finding additional products to put in the salesperson's bag is a big part of it. So on the B2B sort of enterprise side, that's a big deal. On the consumer side, it's a slightly different element in terms, and in particularly, all the networks and everything with the social networks and platforms we've seen have changed the dynamics there a bit. But, historically, that was a little bit of Yahoo's original strategy was, okay, we have this portal, let's just keep adding on things, right? That was before my time at Yahoo, but it was, you see the approach driven by the business strategy. And I think that's, at Adobe, and my personal sort of belief is that it has to be a strategy-driven process. And so the categorization of what you're going after is driven by what you're trying to accomplish strategically.
Cool. Moving on to our next segment, we always talk about what would have happened otherwise. And it's the part where we try and figure out, if this deal didn't go through, were there other acquirers or, would that company have grown on their own? And I feel like a good question to kind of dive into there is, what percentage of deals that you look at actually end up happening?
Yeah, it's very low. I mean, very low. And it's a question of what look at means, right?
Right, yeah.
We've historically done sort of 4 to 10 plus deals a year. I mean, I think actually the market strategy is our sort of strategic umbrella is big enough to do meaningfully more than that. But we've kind of intentionally focused on a strategy that says we're going to make sure that the ones we do are going to work. And Adobe's, we've had bankers come in and be like, what are you guys doing? How do you do it? And because everyone around the valley is sort of saying that, the ones you're doing seem to be working. And I think a lot of it is just the willingness to say no. And that starts at the top. And we have a CEO, Shantanu Narayan, who, I describe as having founder level passion he's been here 19 years. He's been CEO 9. No different than a founder who just feels it in their bones and feels that level of passion for protecting the mission and the vision and that we're going after. And what that means is it's a very high bar on what makes it through the Rubicon of strategy fit, tech fit, team fit, financial expectations, et cetera. And so you have to be willing to say no, and in order to make sure that you get the right ones. You have to be careful that doesn't make you risk averse and not moving quick enough and fast enough. But I wouldn't even know how to put a percentage on it, but I would probably say sub 10%. A lot of things have to align to make a deal happen, both on both the seller and the buyer side. So you're probably looking at that plus or minus 1,000 inbounds a year. I mean, we probably get 2 to 5 emails a day with, hey, would you be interested in checking this out? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
And
There are
a lot of those, yeah, I mean, a lot of those, the answers, and it's probably, again, no different than VC. For us, it's just like, hey, that's not a fit, but appreciate you thinking of us. And we try hard to give quick answers and quick no's if we just don't think it's worth it, and we don't window shop. If we take a meeting, it's because we think it could be interesting.
That's awesome. And that's a great lead in. The next segment that we usually do is tech themes, where we look around and we try and figure out, what technology themes or themes in the industry and the world does this represent to you? And I think a really good kind of twist on themes here is how have you tackled M&A differently at the different companies you've been at? And how have you guys, taken a different kind of strategic or organizational approach between each one?
Yeah. Again, M&A is a tool. I mean, I've always joked that if I ever do something noteworthy enough that requires a memoir at some point, and this stuff makes it in, it would be like, it's not about the deal, right? That would be, there's the whole book with Lance Armstrong back in the day. It's not about the bike. It's like, it's not about the deal. I mean, the deal itself is mechanical, and if you love that world, and there's people who do, and frankly, it's a fascinating, fun world on a lot of levels. If you love that world, I mean, those are the folks that end up in banking, and I have tons of respect for those guys because I think their jobs are really, really hard, and they only get paid if things get done. So and then they oftentimes get a bad rap, and there's I think there's a lot of great ones out there, but it's just a tool, and so the question is, what is your strategy? If you sort of tie that back to your core question of like, how are things a little bit different at different companies? I'd say at Yahoo, we were going in a lot of different directions when I got in there. We were, because it was 08, 09 when I joined, and there was I found at times things were bubbling up bottoms up in terms of people being entrepreneurial and trying to get things going at the business unit level. And there wasn't, we were going through this kind of a restructuring, and there wasn't as much of a clear, hey, we got to go do this tops down. And then you would get the inevitable, hey, we got a call and supposedly Google's looking at buying this. And I was like, so, like, that's not a strategy. Like, doing what your competitors are doing is not a strategy, right? So we spent time around getting alignment around strategy. We spent time around locking in the concept of, from a process perspective, of an executive sponsor, so that you got the alignment early, tops down on strategy, and then it made sure that when we were spending time on things, it tied to that. But frankly, I mean, Yahoo had a reputation, and we worked hard on this, but it was just a little bit of the reality. At some point of the culture was, we had a reputation for being a little bit slow, and so we tried hard to make sure that we were transparent with entrepreneurs around the different hoops and stuff we were going to have to jump through together, so that they could feel in control of it, and we could feel like we were in it together, instead of it just feeling like this monolithic bureaucratic thing. And it wasn't that, but it was just a nature of sort of how things got done, and that culture, and sort of where they were. And the culture of the company affects the process. At Zynga, I mean, the company had been founded like 3 years before. Mark's incredibly aggressive, dynamic entrepreneur. If he believed it made sense and we could convince him, then we could go do it. So, I mean, I remember working on a deal, and, we found out that some entrepreneurs had spun off from one company that we thought was interesting and gone and done something else. And you could just tell from talking to the guy that had been left behind was that the real creative juice had walked out the door. And so it was basically like, you got off the phone, and it was like being in a movie. I was like, find those guys, And so someone on the team got them. Someone on the team got them on the phone. We literally, like 2 hours later, we had them on the phone. And I was like, can you come to San Francisco tomorrow? And they were like, no, like, are you crazy? And I was like, great, we'll be there at 1:00. And we hopped on a plane and went down. And it was sort of like, it was this incredible, it was fun because you felt like you were going to go make it happen immediately. It was that type of time in that company. And from a strategy perspective, we were trying, we had the sort of tiger by the tail in terms of, what was happening with social and everything. We knew the categories that we needed to add from a social gaming perspective. You needed to find the teams to go do them because we didn't have enough people in-house to do it. It was that type of voracious growth. And so it made strategic business sense to try to move that fast. And part of it was just, again, the culture at the top. It's just, look, I guess my point is the culture of the company, the strategy of the company, where it is in the arc of its growth will define what process it creates and how it goes about it, and then also what it sort of means. And at Adobe, we have these bigger arcs that we're working against, and from a corporate strategy perspective, what we've been focused on for several years are sort of three big trends. One is, as I sort of say, everyone in both the consumer and the enterprise side has been dealing with. It's just this unbelievable wave of mobile, and how do you get it to the point where it's truly a tailwind? And there's only a handful of companies that I think have really cracked the code. Facebook, the pivot they did, I was there at Zynga when they were trying to figure that out, and neither one of us really had it working for us. They figured out how to make it work for them, and it really took their business to another heights. And it's like every year when Mary Meeker now at Kleiner Perkins, formerly Morgan Stanley, comes out with that internet report. And that there's that slide where she shows the percentage of time spent on the internet shifting to mobile. And every year it like outpaces the trend line from the year before. And it's like, how do you get it to the point where that's truly a tailwind so that that is just naturally making your business, exceed expectations? So that was one. It's like make mobile a tailwind across our entire business. Second was, it's obvious when you look at the consumer internet that the last 10 years have been around unlocking network effects, right? Through social networks, marketplace business models, platform business models. There's a interesting opportunity, I think, in the sort of SaaS-based enterprise to look at unlocking similar network effects. And the way you do that is by making data and content like really strategic assets. And historically, enterprise software has largely been, we're tools. We'll sell you a tool and you do whatever you want with that tool. Whereas consumer platforms look at data and content as the strategic assets that are sort of theirs, and there's a hybrid approach that I think you're starting to see emerge in B2B businesses as well, where customers certainly have their own data, but they blend it with network level data from the technology providers as well. And so those are some big trends that we've been openly pursuing, and are really sort of came from outside in analysis of what was happening, not just in our own space, but actually was happening across the broader landscape, including the consumer world that I'd sort of seen at Yahoo and Zynga.
Yeah, that's great. It's really cool.
All right, listeners. Now is a great time to thank our longtime friend of the show, ServiceNow. If you are running a large enterprise, AI agents are likely spread across every team, and deploying them is no longer the hard part.
Yeah. The hard part is knowing what permissions they have, what employees are using them for, or what decisions AI is making. AI security for an enterprise at scale is not a small concern. Like, the risks are real.
Exactly. And the challenge with AI is governing it, securing it, measuring it, and making sure that it actually delivers value. That is why ServiceNow built the AI Control Tower.
Yep. AI Control Tower gives enterprises a single place to see, manage, govern, and optimize AI across the entire business. And it works with any AI, not just theirs. Every device on your network, every permission across every system, every AI agent visible and secure in one place.
And ServiceNow can do this because they've spent more than 20 years building the operational backbone of the enterprise, the workflows, governance, approvals, security controls, and institutional knowledge that power how work actually gets done across IT, HR, customer service, finance, and security.
ServiceNow already runs more than 100 billion workflows annually and trillions of transactions for more than 85% of the Fortune 500. So when companies need a place to govern AI at enterprise scale, they're building on a platform at the center of how their business already operates.
And in a future that isn't going to be one AI, it's going to be thousands of AI agents working across every function of the company. But the question is, who's managing them all?
So if you're trying to turn AI ambition into real business outcomes and make it work safely, securely, at scale, go check out servicenow.com/acquired and tell them that Ben and David sent you.
The kind of next section before, or I guess our last section before we do carve outs is the conclusion. And this is where we decide, usually just David and I, did this acquisition go well? Do we call it an A like Instagram, or, on down the line?
Hard to argue with that one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys have any kind of internal process where you look back or even just isolated examples of like what you look for and success metrics of, yes, that was a good acquisition and we should do more things like this?
So one of the things that our team's responsible for under me is the M&A integration function. And I've always felt like that's a critical to be combined in the same group, because otherwise it breeds a behavior that sort of feels like, hey, we're just responsible for banging out the deal.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you throw it over the wall and someone else will integrate it, that type of thing. I always myself have thought of the job as a growth job. It just happens that a deal is part of it, and you have to partner with the entrepreneur, partner with the business owner, and sort of be CEO of that growth opportunity until someone else can truly take the mantle that will be responsible for running that business. And if you think about it that way, there's little things where you put a little extra amount of care and attention into things like retention packages, and even though the entrepreneur is telling you that this person's critical, you're actually sensing that maybe that's more for historical reasons, and they don't understand that in the bigger company, once they're inside, this person who's been their right-hand person from an operational perspective, there's like 3 other functions that are going to serve that purpose for them, and they're actually less important. So you kind of underweight, you sort of talk to them and collaborate to figure out how actually you want to maybe reward them more at the time of the deal, but actually put a little more retention for someone else that's going to, their importance is going to go up post acquisition, those types of nuances. If you're not focused on the integration when you're doing the deal, you just do things differently. And so that's important. And so by having the integration function in there, we make sure that, you know, they're in our weekly meetings and we share learnings, and it's sort of part of the culture. So to me, it starts with culture inside the group, which is, you know, it's a growth leader function, not kind of a deal function. So that's one. From a formal sort of post-mortem evaluation process, we commit to reporting out to you know, our CEO and CFO as well as the board every year, every quarter. We do a report for 2 years. After a deal that reports against basic, you know, key value drivers and metrics. You know, there, as you might imagine, there's financial one, there's a product one, there's sort of employee retention depending on sort of how many people we're trying to retain, that type of stuff. And we try to make sure that, you know, we're being hard on ourselves and, you know, not just greens across the board, but we're being honest about, you know, where things are sort of yellow and red. And every once in a while, we'll do a more formal deep dive post-mortem if something hasn't gone as well. You know, nothing ever, these things are really hard. And as I alluded to earlier with the statistics from the profit from the core, I always joke that in general, you know, this is not NBA free throw shooting. It's much more Hall of Fame baseball hitting, you know, meaning for those that aren't sports fans, you know, it's not 70, 80, 90%. It's probably plus or minus, you know, 30% is not all bad. And our track record at Adobe is actually, you know, dramatically higher than that. Now, every now and then it's like you make lemonades out of lemons where the things didn't work out like you expected them to, but you had the right team and the culture fit and the product to build from, and you went in a slightly different direction. And that's okay too, right? And that goes back to why culture fit is important. It says if things go wrong and the market plays out differently, you can still create value. There are definitely companies that have meaningful hundreds of millions of dollar bets that are effectively swing and misses and complete write-downs. And we haven't had that. And I think a lot of it has to do with the culture of focusing on thinking about the long range before you even do the deal. So the post-mortem and evaluation is important, but it's more the fact that you know you're going to be doing it and you know that that's what we all care about. And that's what sort of changes the upfront.
I love that as a way to wrap it too. That, you know, culture is you know, what's going to drive. You know, things are. It's interesting to think about back to this analogy with venture. Like the happiest day of the next 2 years of your company is going to be when you close that round. Like, and then the real hard work starts. And you know, it's the entrepreneurial drive that's going to keep founders engaged when, you know, life is quite challenging. And I'm sure that's the same, you know, after an acquisition inside the company, and kind of gets back to, if it's not the right culture fit, you're not going to have that drive to keep going.
100%. And it can be sad too, because you see it where, I mean, entrepreneurs who sell something and it doesn't fit, and it ends up withering on the vine or being killed or dies inside a big company, you meet those guys later, or, you know, women, it's like they can't be more bitter, right? Yeah. Something they poured their life into, they feel wasn't respected and honored and whatnot. And sometimes, you know, the market plays out differently and they get that, and that's that. But if a big company, through bureaucracy or missteps or lack of culture fit or whatever, you know, destroys the labor of love that every startup is, that's just such a tragedy, right? And it's and yet in turn, the legacy that accrues to the founder when something is phenomenally successful post acquisition is enormous, and you see that, right? And so that's why I think the fit and people being aligned and going about things the same way just matters so much. Because what you said about that kind of moment in time, hey, celebrate it. You got the money in the bank. And then when you do a selling the company, it's not just the money in the company's bank. It's usually the money in the entrepreneur's bank account. So it's worth celebrating. It's awesome. It's amazing. We always love to celebrate with them. But it's like that's why we test so much on the culture thing is like, yeah, it's day one. It's the beginning, not the end. And if you aren't fired up about that, by the way, it's okay if you're not. You just got to be honest about it early on. Because if you try to pretend like, oh yeah, I'm in it for the long haul, I'm so excited with this vision, it's like, we'll figure that out.
And then you piece like that's when you're going to be bitter, right?
Yeah, you can't fake passion.
Yep, totally.
So true in so many walks of life.
Let's move on real quick. We do have a follow-up we want to make sure we cover this week that I will just mention briefly, but Instagram. So Taylor, one of the things we do is if something new happens on one of the deals we've covered in the past, we call it out on the show. And in this case, relevant to 2 episodes we've had in the past, Instagram launched stories. So we covered Instagram as one of our early shows, and then we covered Facebook's failed acquisition of Snapchat. And super interesting to watch what's happening with Instagram stories.
Yeah, I don't want to dive too much into this because it's not the dedicated episode for it, but Facebook is very scared of Snapchat. Snapchat doesn't have the global penetration that Facebook does, so there's plenty of opportunity to defend international turf there, but they very well should be afraid of Snapchat because of the engagement that they're getting and the kind of it's the first place that people check and where a lot more activity happens than Instagram. And it's really interesting to see Facebook, after having some failed attempts to launch Facebook branded platforms to disrupt Snapchat
and others. Yep.
Instead saying, you know what? All these kids are already on Instagram, even though Instagram's about that one perfectly curated, crafted photo. Let's see if we can throw this completely other paradigm into this and see if Instagram can be the one hub for that generation.
Yeah.
And
I feel like this might merit a future episode.
Yeah.
If you want to hear that, let us know on email or Slack. But let's move on quickly to carve-outs. Taylor, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So my 3 most recent reads. I'm by the way, I read constantly. I'm sort of my family. My wife is definitely much more of a purger, and I think if I moved entirely to a Kindle, she'd be happy. But I tend to not only like to read books, but then sort of see them around the house. It just kind of makes me happy. I grew up in one of those households, and so it's just part of life and part of sort of embracing everything that's out there to be learned, and I feel like you can never have enough time to get through them all. But the 3 most recent ones I've read and actually loved all 3. One was Mindset by Carol Dweck, which talks about the growth versus fixed mindset. Book. And just phenomenal. And look, the basic concept you can embrace and understand in 30 seconds. It's the concept of, are you approaching life with this feeling that everything is fixed and you just got whatever talents you were given in life, and that is what it is, and you have to sort of expose those, but not, you don't have a chance to grow? Or do you believe that actually, you have what you have, but it's basically irrelevant? And the question is, what are you going to grow towards through hard work and effort? And what was fascinating by reading the book is when you describe it the way you just did, anyone who's sort of ambitious type A entrepreneur, or like those of us on this podcast are I'm sure thinking, well, I'm a growth person. I'm always trying to get better, and it's great. And I read this book, and it was very humbling to sort of realize that in some parts of your life you were completely growth oriented. In other ways, you had intrinsically and sort of had this concept of a fixed mindset that I have talent in that, or I don't. And so thinking deeply about that for yourself, for your kids, if you're a parent, for your team, if you're a leader, I thought was incredibly powerful.
Yeah, wow. I was having drinks with a friend the other night, and he asked me, so are you more of a routine person, or are you like flexible to do whatever? And it was so interesting that, in the work that we do at Pioneer Square Labs, we're super flexible. If it's like, hey, you got to fly down to LA in 2 days because, the opportunity for this company is to meet with someone there, doing that. Or if it's your marketing today or your product today, like all over the place, and schedule changes all the time. But in my personal life, like I need to wake up at the same time and have the exact same morning routine every morning, or else I'm not myself. And it's amazing how different we can be in different aspects of our lives when we think of ourselves as either a routine person or a growth person or whatever it is, and it's not necessarily unilateral across the board.
Yeah, no, totally. That actually, I mean, that makes me think of another one, which, if you're exploring all the podcasts, and this one is I think literally or near the top of the charts, but I've definitely been enjoying Tim Ferriss's one, and I think his focus on routines and the questions around morning routines and stuff just fascinates me, because I'm probably, there's things where I'm somewhat routine oriented, but there's a lot of things where I rebel against it and don't want to commit to an absolute strict routine. Because I kind of like the dynamic that you described of like being ready for the most important thing and hop on the plane and go do that. And it's fascinating to sort of think about how important routines and systems are to success. That's another one I would flag. Before I turn it over, I'll just flag the other two. The second would be Shoe Dog, about Phil Knight from Nike, and unbelievable entrepreneurial journey, and just an incredibly revealing memoir that I really just found illuminating, inspiring, and awesome. But it also, to me, for you, David, on the venture side, it will give you will come away reading this book. You'll feel like you're doing God's work, because I think we underestimate how this concept that capital is almost available from anywhere, and that you guys in the venture community, and actually I have Adobe Ventures under me as well, so we do this here and there, is that where it's like we're competing to be the ones who provide capital to the right businesses or whatever, and it's like there was this point in time where like businesses that are now like changing the world literally couldn't get capital. It was just insane. Yeah. Like reading the story, and I'm not talking about a short period of time. Like for I can't remember, like 7, 8, almost 10 years. He was like on a shoestring and like trying to get these bank loans. It was just crazy. It blew your mind. So it was that one was phenomenal.
David is doing God's work. Let's be clear.
Yeah. No. Yes. Yeah, exactly. And then the last would be Originals by Adam Grant. That was just, sort of focusing in on creativity and sort of what are the hallmarks of people, and how do they go about that, and how do you be original, and who are the originals and stuff. And so, as I said, I think one of the fun things about software and internet is it gives a lot of clay for all of us to play with, and you can absolutely be an original if you want to go be. So those three have been a lot of fun the last probably even 2 or 3 weeks. I've kind of churned through all of them.
That's awesome. The Originals, I hadn't heard of that. I have to add it to my list.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll go next real quick, because it picks up on a couple of those themes from a disparate angle. We started the episode on a sports topic, so I can't end it on one. I can't not end it on one, given that it's the Olympics right now. And my carve out is, if you haven't seen, everybody's got to go watch Simone Biles, the women's gymnast.
God.
I mean, this girl is like the most dominant athlete in her sport I think I've ever seen. She makes Michael Jordan look like he's in the D League, would be the comparison. And she just won the individual all around gold medal in the Olympics by an enormous margin.
Yeah, I've never seen the person who is best in their sport be so far ahead of the entire pack.
Yeah, incredible. And I was watching an interview with her, or reading an interview with her, and one of the things that was said in it reminds me of the mindset, Taylor, of your carve out. When she was a little younger, I mean, she's still only 19, but when she was a little younger, she didn't really have a lot of confidence in herself, and would say, "Oh, well, I'm not as good as the other girls," and like, and now that she is like the most dominant athlete that's ever lived in the sport, pretty inspiring. So that's mine for the week.
Yeah.
Love it.
Mine's a quickie. For those of you who listen to the Alaska Airlines episode, know that I have a thing for airplanes, and there's this incredible video on Vox. It's only 10 minutes long, on the history of the Concorde, how it came to be, how that was funded, what the other supersonic airplane undertakings were, and why we don't have supersonic flight today. So if that's for airplane nerds out there, you probably know it all, but it's just a really well put together little 10-minute video, and it's thrilling. So highly recommend going and checking it out.
All right, listeners, now is a great time to talk about one of our favorite companies, StatSig.
Yes, long-time acquired partner. There is a reason why the best product teams at companies like OpenAI and Notion, Atlassian, Figma, Rippling, Brex, and more rely on StatSig, whether they are iterating on their core product features or shipping AI-powered experiences at scale.
Yep. In the crazy speed of today's AI world, shipping fast is just table stakes now. It's basically trivial to build and deploy your app constantly. The real advantage is how quickly you learn what changes actually created value for customers and how fast you can use that signal to guide what you ship next. Whether it's a feature tweak, a pricing change, a performance improvement, or an AI update like a model change or prompt adjustment, they're not relying on instinct. They're measuring what actually moved engagement, retention, and ultimately revenue. And as more teams build with AI, that learning loop becomes even more important. Building with LLMs introduces non-determinism into your product experience. The same input doesn't always produce the same output, and behavior can shift in subtle ways in real-world use.
So doing offline evals will give you part of the picture, but you can really only understand the impact once your product is live with real users, and then you can measure how their behavior actually changes. It's very different than the way that you would ship features in a pre-AI world where you knew exactly what the software was going to do in production.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is where StatSig comes in. It brings experimentation, feature flags, and product analytics into one unified system so teams can ship safely, test rigorously, and directly link what they changed to how users actually behaved. The result is a tighter feedback loop and learning that compounds over time, so you don't just ship more, you ship better.
So if you want to make learning your competitive advantage, whether you're building new AI experiences or just evolving your existing core product, go to statsig.com/acquired to get started.
That's all we've got.
Awesome. That's a wrap. Thanks everybody for listening. And most importantly, huge thank you to Taylor for joining us.
Yeah, Taylor, where can our audience find you?
I'm here at Adobe, so feel free to drop me a line at barada@adobe.com if you have something that you think we should be looking at. I'm also on Twitter at just Taylor Barada and LinkedIn as well. So feel free to reach out and happy to chat.
Awesome. And listeners, if you like the show, rate us on iTunes, tweet this episode to your friends, share it wherever you see fit, and thanks so much for listening.
We'll see you next time.
Who got the truth? Is it you? Is it you? Is it you? Who got the truth now? Huh?